The bedtime story had just reached the part where the princess found the magic garden when the entire room turned red. David Harper watched his daughter's hologram flicker as emergency lights swept across his cramped quarters. Lily's gap-toothed smile vanished mid-sentence, replaced by static and then nothing. The communication line went dead. He barely had time to curse before the station-wide announcement blared through every speaker. Director Phillips sounded like a man who had just swallowed glass. An Imperial warship was requesting emergency docking. Life support failure. Critical situation. And then the words that made every human in the sector freeze. Dragon throne vessel. David joined the crowd gathering at the main observation window. The warship looked like someone had tried to build a cathedral out of knives. It limped toward them, trailing frozen atmosphere, its hull plates glowing dull red where the heating systems had catastrophically failed. Inside that ship was someone important enough to command 2,000 worlds. Phillips gathered the senior staff in the conference room. His hand shook as he pulled up the passenger manifest. David stood at the back with the other maintenance crew, expecting to be dismissed. Then Phillips said the name that changed everything. Empress Seraphine. The room went silent. Every person there knew what that name meant. She had unified the Draconian sovereignty through 3 decades of war. She negotiated the Treaty of Broken Moons that prevented galactic conflict. She was older than most human nations and more dangerous than a supernova. And her ship's heating systems had died while she was aboard. Phillips looked sick. The station could barely generate enough heat for the human crew. Dragons needed temperatures that would cook a person alive just to stay comfortable. In the cold of space, without heat, they entered something called torpor. Their metabolism crashed. They became slow, vulnerable, eventually comatose. For a creature that ruled through strength, it was the ultimate humiliation. The director's eyes swept the room. They needed to house her somewhere warm. The reactor room was too dangerous. The medical bay too small. Every heated section was either crucial to operations or completely unsuitable for royalty. David heard himself speak before his brain caught up. His quarters were closest to the main reactor. They ran hot enough that he usually kept the thermostat low. It wasn't much, but it was the warmest private space they had. Phillips stared at him like he had volunteered to jump into the sun. The other staff members took a collective step back. No one wanted to host a Dragon Empress. They were stories told to scare children. They were conquerors and warriors and utterly without mercy. But Phillips had no choice. He accepted with visible reluctance. 20 minutes later, David stood outside his own door while a security team swept the room. They removed anything that could be used as a weapon, which turned out to be almost everything. His repair tools went into storage. His kitchen knives disappeared. Even his daughter's clay sculpture, because apparently it had a pointed edge. When they finally let him back in, his quarters looked stripped bare. They had left his bed, his small desk, and a hologram projector he used to call Lily. Everything else was gone. A medical monitor had been installed in the corner, its screen already displaying temperature readings and atmospheric data. The door chime made him jump. He opened it expecting guards or officials. Instead, she filled the entire doorway. David had seen dragons before, but only in videos and news broadcasts. Seeing one in person was different. Seraphine stood 12 feet tall, with her head slightly bowed to fit through the human-sized entrance. Scales covered every inch of her visible skin in patterns that shifted between deep blue and purple depending on the light. Her wings were folded tight against her back, the membranes nearly translucent. Her eyes were the color of molten gold and completely unreadable. She wore robes that probably cost more than David earned in a decade. Ice crystals clung to the fabric. Her breath came out in visible puffs, despite the station's heating system running at full capacity. 4 guards flanked her, but she waved them back with one clawed hand. They retreated down the corridor, clearly unhappy about leaving her alone with a human. She studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped inside without a word. David pressed himself against the wall to give her room. She moved slowly, each step careful and deliberate. When she reached the center of the room, she stopped. Her head turned, taking in the sparse furnishings and tight quarters. This space was smaller than a closet in her palace. She probably had servants who lived in better conditions. She said nothing. Just stood there, breath still visible, scales darker than they should be. The medical monitor's readings crept steadily downward. Hours passed. David tried to make himself useful by checking the heating system, rerouting what power he could spare, anything to raise the temperature another degree. The Empress remained still as a statue near his bed. She had wrapped her wings around herself like a cloak, but it clearly wasn't enough. When he returned from adjusting the environmental control for the third time, he found her in the corner. She had folded herself into a space that should have been too small, making herself compact. Her eyes were half closed. The scales along her neck had gone nearly black. That David's thermal blanket lay on his bed, where he had left it that morning. It was military surplus, designed to retain heat in extreme conditions. He had bought it with his first paycheck, back when the station's heating was even worse. The Empress's eyes tracked him as he picked it up. Her gaze dropped to the blanket, then back to his face. Her jaw worked like she was trying to form words through cold, stiffened muscles. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It held none of the command he expected, just exhaustion and something that might have been desperation. "Human, may I share your blanket?" David's body locked up completely. Every muscle froze. His hands went numb. His brain stuttered and stalled. The most powerful being in known space was asking him for help, and he could not move. The shivering broke through his paralysis. David's hands started working again when he saw her shoulders tremble. She was trying to hide it, this creature who commanded armadas and toppled governments, but her body betrayed her. The cold was winning. He crossed the room in 3 steps. Up close, he could see the ice forming along the edges of her scales. Her breathing had slowed to something shallow and concerning. The medical monitor screamed warnings that everyone was probably ignoring, because what could they do about it? David held out the blanket. She took it with hands that shook, wrapped it around her shoulders. It looked absurdly small against her frame, covering maybe a third of her body. She pulled it tighter anyway, desperate for any warmth. It wasn't enough. He could see that immediately. Her eyes were starting to glaze. The readings on the monitor dropped another 2 degrees. His father had been a paramedic. David grew up hearing stories about hypothermia victims, about how you had to share body heat when nothing else worked. This was different. This was a completely alien biology. But the principles seemed universal. She was cold. He was warm. Simple math. He sat down next to her. She went rigid. Her head snapped toward him, eyes suddenly sharp and focused. For a second, he thought she might kill him for the presumption. No one touched an empress, especially not a human maintenance worker who smelled like machine oil and recycled air. But then her scales registered his warmth, and something in her expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or desperation finally overriding pride. She leaned against him. David had expected her to feel like stone or metal. Instead, her scales were smooth like river rocks, cool but not cold. He could feel her shaking against his side. Slowly, carefully, she adjusted her position until her wing draped partially across his back. The membrane was thin enough to see through. Veins pulsed beneath the surface, carrying sluggish blood. They sat in silence. Minutes crawled past. The monitor's alarms gradually stopped screaming. Her breathing deepened and steadied. The tension in her frame began to ease. She spoke without moving. "Why would you do this?" David kept his eyes straight ahead. Looking at her felt dangerous. "You're cold. I can help. That's what people do. I could kill you with one hand." "Yes. I have ordered the deaths of millions." "I know. Then why help me?" He risked a glance at her face. Those gold eyes studied him like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. David thought about Lily's questions. His daughter asked why about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do ships fly? Why do people help each other? "Because you need it," he said finally. "Because you're suffering and I can make it stop. Does there need to be another reason?" She had no answer for that. Her head tilted slightly, a gesture that looked almost human. "Your species confuses us. We get that a lot." More silence. David felt his back starting to cramp, but didn't dare move. The Empress's breathing had finally returned to something normal. Her scales had lightened from black to dark blue. Progress. His data pad chimed. Lily's scheduled call. He tried to reach for it without disturbing the Empress, but the movement made her shift. She sat up slightly, creating space. "Your offspring," she said. Not a question. Somehow she knew. David nodded and accepted the call. Lily's face filled the small screen, grinning wide enough to show the gap where she had lost her first tooth. She launched into a story about school, about her friend who could do a handstand for 30 seconds, about the frog they were raising in science class that he listened to every word, asked questions, laughed at the right moments, promised he was proud of her drawing even though the transmission was too grainy to make out details. The whole conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like oxygen. When the call ended, he found the Empress watching him. Not the screen. Him. His face. "How long since you held her?" she asked. David had to think about it. Calculate the deployments and travel time and mandatory quarantine periods. 8 months. Maybe 9. That causes you pain. Yes. Yet you stay here. Away from her. He shrugged as much as he could with her wings still partially across his back. Someone has to monitor this station. The pay is good. Good enough that she gets better schooling. Better opportunities. That matters more than my feelings. The Empress was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised him. "I have never met my parents. Dragon eggs are raised in communal hatcheries. We learn strength, competition, survival. But not this." She gestured at the data pad. "Not whatever that was." "Love," David said. "That's called love." She repeated the word slowly. It sounded strange in her voice, like she was tasting something foreign. "This love. It makes you sacrifice. Causes pain. What benefit does it provide?" David smiled despite everything. "You're thinking about it wrong. It's not a transaction. I don't help Lily expecting something back. I do it because she's mine to protect. Because her happiness matters more than my comfort. That's what love is. Illogical. Completely. Yet you consider it valuable. The most valuable thing we have." She absorbed this in silence. Outside, the station hummed and clicked around them. Somewhere, engineers were trying to fix her warship. Somewhere, her advisors were probably panicking about her absence. Somewhere, the galaxy continued spinning without caring that an Empress and a maintenance worker were sharing a blanket in a room barely bigger than a closet. Finally, she spoke again. "I have ruled for 273 years. I have fought wars, negotiated treaties, built an empire across 2,000 worlds. I have advisors, soldiers, servants, billions who would die at my command." She paused. "But I have never had a friend." David looked at her, really looked, saw past the scales and wings and imperial bearing to something underneath. Something lonely. "Well," he said quietly, "you've got one now." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. The second night was easier and harder. Easier because they had established a routine. David would finish his maintenance shift, return to find Seraphine waiting near the warmest wall. They would share the blanket and body heat until the temperature stabilized enough for her to rest. The medical monitor had stopped screaming entirely. Harder because talking to an Empress like she was a person felt increasingly natural, and that terrified him. She asked endless questions. About Earth. About human childhood. About why people formed families when they could just survive alone. David tried to explain concepts that seemed obvious until you had to put them into words. Community. Trust. The way humans needed each other, not just for survival, but for something deeper. Seraphine listened with an intensity that made him nervous. She absorbed every detail like she was studying for an exam. When he mentioned family dinners, she wanted to know why people ate together. When he talked about Lily's bedtime routine, she questioned the logic of wasting time on stories when sleep was the goal. "It's not about efficiency," David explained, struggling to find the right words. "It's about connection. About her knowing I'm there. That she matters enough for me to spend time with her." "Time," Seraphine repeated. "Your species has so little of it, yet you give it away freely. That's what makes it valuable." She considered this while her wing shifted against his back. They had stopped bothering to maintain distance. Warmth was warmth. Survival trumped dignity. Outside his quarters, the station was falling apart. David heard it in fragments. Engineers arguing about power distribution. Scientists panicking about the star's increasing instability. The radiation waves were coming faster than predicted. If they didn't evacuate soon, the shields would fail and everyone would cook inside their metal coffin. But Seraphine's warship needed 2 more days of repairs minimum. The damage was extensive. Her crew had cannibalized half the heating systems, trying to keep the engines running. Now, both were compromised. He overheard crew members in the corridors. Low voices that stopped when he approached. Words like sacrifice and abandon and not our problem. They were scared. Humans got stupid when they were scared. Someone suggested leaving the Empress behind. Just taking the station's evacuation shuttles and running. Let the dragon die in the radiation. Save themselves. Director Phillips shut that down hard. But the murmuring continued. David confronted them in the recreation room. 5 crew members he had worked with for months. People he had shared meals with. They went quiet when he entered. Say it to my face, he told them. The youngest one, an engineer named Riley, met his eyes. We're going to die because of her. Because we're too afraid to make the smart choice. The smart choice. She wouldn't save us. You know that. Dragons don't do sentiment. They don't do sacrifice. Why should we? David thought about that. About Seraphine sitting in his quarters right now, probably listening to every word through the station's thin walls. About how she had wrapped herself in his cheap blanket like it was treasure. About the look in her eyes when Lily called. You're right, he said. She probably wouldn't have saved us. But that doesn't mean we should become like her. Or like what we think she is. Zovidi noble. That's your solution. We survive because we work together. That's what makes us human. Riley laughed bitterly. Real inspiring. Put that on our tombstones. David left before he did something stupid like punch a colleague. When he returned to his quarters, Seraphine sat exactly where he had left her. Her eyes tracked him as he entered. I heard, she said. I figured. They are correct. I would not have saved them. David stopped. Turned. What? She met his gaze without flinching. 2 weeks ago, if I encountered a human station in distress, I would have passed it without thought. Your species is short-lived, weak, barely relevant to galactic affairs. Saving you would provide no strategic advantage. The words hit like a physical blow. David knew it was true. He had always known, but hearing her say it out loud made it real. But now, he asked. Seraphine stood, her full height making the ceiling feel impossibly low. Now I have shared a blanket with one of you. Now I know what it feels like when someone helps without expecting reward. Now I understand what you meant about time being valuable, because you have so little. She moved closer. Now I think perhaps my species has been measuring strength wrong for millennia. Before David could respond, alarms blared through the station. Emergency announcement. All personnel to evacuation stations immediately. The star had destabilized ahead of schedule. They had hours, not days. Phillips's voice crackled over the intercom. Panic barely controlled. They were evacuating. Everyone except essential crew needed to get to the shuttles now. Seraphine's advisors arrived within minutes. They burst into David's quarters led by a dragon who introduced himself as General Rodhack. He barely glanced at David before addressing the Empress in their own language. Harsh sounds like rocks grinding together. Seraphine responded in kind. Their conversation grew heated. Rodhack's scales flushed red with anger. He gestured sharply at David, at the station around them, at everything. Finally, Seraphine spoke in English. For David's benefit, General Rodhack believes we should evacuate immediately. Leave the station to its fate. Your ship isn't ready, David said. We will manage. The alternative is staying and dying with humans. Rodhack said the last word like a curse. Seraphine's eyes never left David's face. There's a third option. My warship still has power reserves. If we reroute them to boost the station's shields, everyone survives. That would leave your ship defenseless, Rodhack snarled. The radiation would destroy it, along with 200 years of irreplaceable Imperial archives. Battle honors. History. Yes, this is insanity. Seraphine turned to her general. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every year she had ruled. The human taught me something, rot hack. Strength without compassion is just cruelty. Power without purpose is just waste. I will not let fear make me a coward. Rodhack's jaw worked silently. Then he bowed stiffly and left. Seraphine looked at David. Your daughter will have her father. I promise you this. David realized what she wasn't saying. Her ship might not survive. She might not survive. She was choosing his life over her own safety. He said her name. Not her title, just her name. For the first time, her expression softened in a way he didn't have words for. The plan was simple. Execution would be lethal. Seraphine coordinated everything with the cold efficiency that had built her empire. Her warship would position itself between the station and the incoming radiation wave. Meanwhile, they needed to physically connect the power systems. Cable the Dragon ship's reserves directly into the station's shield generators. Someone had to go outside to make those connections. Someone had to spacewalk between two vessels while radiation alarms screamed warnings. Someone had to handle cables thick as tree trunks and lock them into ports designed for automated systems. David volunteered before anyone else could. Phillips refused immediately. Too dangerous. Too specialized. They needed someone with advanced training. David was just maintenance. There had to be another option, but there wasn't. Every engineer with spacewalk certification was needed to manage the shield systems. Every scientist was calculating radiation trajectories and safe corridors. Every pilot was prepping evacuation shuttles in case everything failed. David had done station-side repairs before. He knew the exterior layout. He could move fast. And frankly, everyone else was too valuable to risk. Phillips looked like he wanted to argue further, but time was bleeding away. He gave permission with visible reluctance. Seraphine found David in the airlock prep room. He was checking his suit seals for the third time, running through procedures his father had drilled into him years ago. Always check twice, then check again. Space didn't forgive mistakes. You will not do this, she said. David didn't look up from the seal check. Have to. No one else can. Your species is fragile. The radiation will kill you. Suit's rated for it. Probably. Probably. She made the word sound like an accusation. You have an offspring. She needs you. She needs me alive. Everyone here needs to stay alive. This is how we make that happen. Seraphine moved between him and the airlock door. All 12 feet of her, scales dark with distress, wings partially spread. I forbid it. David finally met her eyes. You don't get to forbid me from saving people. That's not how this works. I am an empress, and I'm a father. Guess which one matters more to me right now? They stared at each other. David saw something in her expression he had never expected. Fear, not for herself, for him. If you die, she said quietly, we'll share my blanket. The words hit him harder than any order or threat could have. He put a hand on her arm. The scales were warm now, healthy. He had done that, kept her alive long enough to matter. If I don't go, he said, there won't be anyone left to share anything with. He suited up while she watched in silence. The helmet sealed with a hiss. The suit systems came online, showing him readouts he barely understood. Radiation levels, oxygen supply, temperature regulation. All of it looked bad. David entered the airlock before he could think too hard about what he was doing. The inner door sealed. He looked back through the window. Seraphine stood there, one clawed hand pressed against the glass. Then the outer door opened, and he stepped into nothing. Space was exactly as terrible as he remembered. The void pressed against his suit from all directions. Stars burned too bright, without atmosphere to dim them. The station looked small and fragile. The warship looked like a dying giant, its hull scarred and dark. David activated his magnetic boots and started walking. Each step locked him to the hull. Each step took him closer to the exposed ports where the cables needed to connect. His suit's radiation alarm was already warning him. Yellow, not critical. Yet, the cables waited in storage compartments built into the station's exterior. He hauled the first one out, nearly lost his grip when it twisted in zero gravity. The thing must have weighed 400 pounds on Earth. Out here it was just mass and momentum. He dragged it across the gap between vessels. His boots kept him anchored, but the cable fought him. Finally, he reached the first connection port on the warship's hull. Lined it up, locked it in place, point one down. 3 to go. His radiation alarm turned orange. David moved faster. Grabbed the second cable. This one snagged on a damaged hull plate. He had to manually unwrap it, fingers clumsy in the suit's gloves. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The suit's cooling system struggled to keep up. Second cable connected. The warship's power reserves began flowing into the station's systems. Inside, engineers would be seeing power levels rise. They would know someone was out here making it happen. Orange turned to red. The third cable was the hardest. It had to connect to a port on the underside of the warship, requiring him to crawl across damaged sections where his boots barely held. Twice he nearly drifted free. Twice he caught himself at the last second. His hands shook. His breathing came too fast. The suit's warnings had become a constant shriek. Third cable locked. He reached for the fourth, and his vision blurred. The suit's display showed radiation levels entering dangerous territory. His body was absorbing energy it couldn't process. Cells were already dying. The question was how many he could afford to lose. David thought about Lily, about her gap-toothed smile and terrible singing voice, about the way she hugged him like she could squeeze all the time apart into nothing. That he connected the fourth cable. The radiation wave hit. His suit's protection failed almost immediately. Alarm screamed. His skin burned. But the connection was made. Power flowed. The station's shields reinforced. Everyone inside would live. David tried to get back to the airlock. His legs wouldn't cooperate. He drifted, tether straining. Everything hurt in ways he didn't have names for. Then something grabbed him. Claws, gentle despite their size. Wings spread to block the radiation. Seraphine had come outside, suited in dragon armor, and she was carrying him back. He tried to tell her she was being stupid, risking herself, but his radio had died. All he could do was watch her face through their helmet glass as she pulled him to safety. She looked terrified. An empress who feared nothing, terrified for a maintenance worker she had known 3 days. The inner airlock door closed behind them. Medical teams swarmed. Someone was shouting about radiation poisoning. David's vision tunneled to nothing. The last thing he saw was Seraphine refusing to leave his side. Consciousness returned in fragments. White ceiling. Beeping machines. The chemical smell of medical equipment. Pain that felt like it went down to his bones. David tried to move, and his body informed him that was a terrible idea. Someone sat beside the bed. Not a doctor. Too still. Too large. He turned his head slowly. Seraphine had pulled a chair close enough that her wing draped across the bed's edge. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Her scales looked darker than usual. Exhaustion, maybe, or worry. "You're alive," she said. "Apparently." His voice came out like gravel. "How bad?" "Severe radiation exposure. The doctors say you'll recover fully. Eventually. With treatment." David processed that. Eventually meant weeks. Maybe months. The station's medical facilities weren't equipped for this level of damage. He would need to be transferred elsewhere. Away from his job. Away from the ability to pay for Lily's school that he must have made a face because Seraphine leaned closer. "What troubles you?" "Medical leave means no pay. No pay means my daughter's school situation changes. She'll have to transfer. Again. She hates that. This concerns you more than your injuries." "Yeah." Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something surprising. "I have arranged for your medical expenses to be covered by the Imperial Treasury. Additionally, your daughter will receive a scholarship to any school she chooses, funded indefinitely." David stared at her. "Why?" "Because you went outside first. I merely followed your example." "That's not the same thing." "Is it not?" She adjusted her wings slightly, the membrane catching the light. "You risked yourself to save people who questioned your judgment. I retrieved you because the thought of you dying felt unacceptable. We both did illogical things driven by something other than strategic thinking." "Sentiment," David said. "Yes, your species has infected me with it." Despite everything hurting, he smiled. "Sorry about that." "I am not." The medical bay doors opened. General Rothack entered, saw Seraphine still sitting vigil, and his scales flushed with barely controlled anger. He spoke in the dragon language, harsh and clipped. Seraphine answered in English. Still for David's benefit. I will leave when the human is stable. Not before. Rodhack switched to English as well, his accent thick. You diminish yourself, showing favoritism to a single human. The other empires are watching. They see weakness. Let them. Your throne becomes unstable. Rivals gather. You must return and show strength. I am showing strength, just not the kind you recognize. Rodhack's claws flexed. For a second, David thought the general might actually attack. But Seraphine stood, her full height making even Rodhack look small. The air between them crackled with tension. I am your empress, she said softly. Have you forgotten? Rodhack bowed stiffly and left. The door closed with more force than necessary. Seraphine sat back down. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. My advisors are correct. I have responsibilities to billions of subjects. Rebellions are stirring. If I do not return soon, civil war becomes likely. Then go. It is not that simple. David understood. He felt it too. This thing between them that had no name. This impossible connection formed in 3 days of shared warmth and honest conversation. Going back to their separate lives meant pretending it never happened. And neither of them was good at pretending. How long do I have? She asked. Before you recover enough to return to duty? A month. Maybe more. Then I have a month. She stood, began pacing the small medical bay. I will return to my empire. I will quiet the rebellions. I will remind my rivals why they fear me. But I will not forget this. She stopped, turned to face him. You show me that strength and warmth are not opposites. That power used only for conquest is hollow. I will not let them take that from me. David pushed himself up slightly, ignoring his body's protests. They'll fight you. Your own people. Change is scary. Let them fight. I'm still an empress. I did not build an empire by being gentle. But you'll be different. Yes. She returned to his bedside. Different. Because a maintenance worker shared his blanket and taught me that isolation is not strength. The next weeks passed in a blur. David recovered slowly under medical care that was far better than anything he could have afforded. Seraphine visited daily at first, then every other day as her ship repairs completed and duties called her back. They talked about everything. She explained dragon culture, the rigid hierarchies, and brutal trials. He shared human stories, the messy families and complicated loyalties. They argued about philosophy and laughed at cultural misunderstandings and slowly became something neither had words for. Friends seemed inadequate. Allies too cold. Whatever they were, it ran deeper than words allowed that on the day her ship was declared ready, Seraphine arrived with something in her clawed hands. David's blanket, the thermal one they had shared. She had kept it with her, he realized. Carried it back to her warship. I need to leave, she said. I know. This belongs to you. David looked at the worn blanket, then at her. Keep it, so you remember warmth, even when I'm not there. She clutched it close. Will you remember me? When you return to your daughter and your life. He reached into his pocket, pulled out something small. The scale she had given him, shed naturally during one of her visits. He had kept it close, a piece of her. Every day, he promised, she wanted to say more. He could see it in her eyes. But time had run out. She had an empire to rule. He had a daughter to raise. Their lives existed in different galaxies. Seraphine left without looking back. David watched the medical bay door close behind her. 3 days later, his treatment completed enough for travel. Director Phillips arranged transport back to Earth. Back to Lily. Back to normal life. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Earth smelled like rain and soil and 1,000 growing things. David stood in the spaceport with his duffel bag, breathing real atmosphere for the first time in months. No recycled air. No metallic tang. Just wind and weather and the chaos of millions of humans living on top of each other. Lily spotted him before he saw her. She came running through the crowd, all 7 years of her moving at maximum speed. He dropped to his knees and caught her, held on like he could make up for 8 months in a single hug. She talked nonstop about school and friends and the science project that won 3rd place and the 2 she lost, and could he believe she could swim now, really swim, not just dog paddling. David listened to every word, stored every detail, Try to memorize the sound of her voice in person instead of through static-filled transmissions. His sister Anna waited at a respectful distance. She had taken Lily while he worked off-world, raised her like her own. When Lily finally detached, Anna pulled him into a hug that felt like forgiveness and relief mixed together. "You look terrible," she said. "Radiation poisoning will do that." The news said it was a station malfunction. David thought about everything the news didn't say. About an empress huddled in a corner asking to share his blanket. About spacewalks and sacrifice and the way someone's scales felt when they were finally warm again. "Something like that," he said. They took the train to Anna's apartment. Lily sat pressed against his side the entire time, like she was afraid he might disappear if she stopped touching him. David understood the feeling that he found groundside work within a week. Maintenance for a local university, fixing heating systems, and patching leaks. The pay was a fraction of what he made on the station. But he could see Lily every day, tuck her in at night, be present for the small moments that made up a life. The scale stayed in his pocket. He touched it sometimes when no one was looking. Wondered what Seraphine was doing, if she remembered, if any of it had mattered beyond 3 strange days in a cramped room. Then the news broadcast started changing that IT began with small reports. Dragon Empire implementing new training protocols. Emphasis on unit cohesion. Soldiers encouraged to form bonds beyond standard military hierarchy. Analysts called it unusual, but not unprecedented. Then larger changes. The Empire establishing mentorship programs. Older dragons responsible for guiding younger ones beyond simple combat training. Clan structures receiving imperial support. Concepts like loyalty and connection being actively fostered instead of discouraged. The galactic community watched with confusion. This wasn't how dragons worked. They were individualists, conquerors. They valued strength and personal power above all else. Political experts predicted the empire would fracture, that Seraphine was destroying the very foundation of dragon culture, that rivals would see weakness and attack. They were wrong. Dragon military effectiveness increased by measurable percentages. Units fought with better coordination. Soldiers displayed unprecedented willingness to protect each other. The Empire's borders, always defended through raw power, became truly secure because the defenders cared about what they protected. Seraphine gave a speech that every news service played on repeat. David watched it a dozen times, studying her face on the screen. She spoke about strength, about how true power came not from isolation, but from connection. How an empire built only on fear would eventually crumble, but one built on mutual loyalty could last millennia. She challenged every dragon to find their own strength through bonds rather than solitude. The speech ended with a phrase that made David's breath catch. "Someone once taught me that warmth is not weakness. I'm teaching you the same." 6 months after his return to Earth, David received a message. Official Imperial Seal. His hands shook opening it. The Dragon Throne requested his presence as a cultural ambassador. The Empire wanted to learn from humanity. Specifically, they wanted to learn about connection, family structures, and the mechanisms that made humans so inexplicably cooperative despite their physical limitations. The offer included ridiculous pay, housing suitable for him and Lily, and educational opportunities that would make his sister's scholarship look like pocket change. He would essentially be teaching dragons how to care about each other. The IT was absurd. Impossible. Completely insane. Lily found him staring at the message. "What's that?" He explained carefully. "Leaving Earth again. Going to the dragon homeworld. Teaching aliens about family and friendship." It sounded ridiculous out loud. "Why come?" Lily asked. "If you wanted to. But it's dangerous. Unknown. We'd be the first humans living there full time." She considered this with the seriousness only children could manage. Would there be other kids? Probably not at first. Would you be happy? The question surprised him. He thought about Seraphine, about unfinished conversations and the weight of her wing across his back, about the look in her eyes when she promised his daughter would have her father. "Yes," he admitted. "I think I would be." Lily nodded like that settled everything. "Then we should go. You've been sad since you came back. Not big sad, just a little sad. Like you left something important behind." She was too perceptive for 7. David pulled her close. When did you get so smart? I'm always smart. You're just slow noticing. They arrived on the Dragon homeworld 6 months later. The Imperial Palace made Earth's biggest cities look tiny. David and Lily descended from their transport into a world of soaring architecture and impossible scale. Seraphine waited at the landing pad. She wore formal robes that probably required an engineering degree to put on. Her scales caught the light like living jewels. An empress in every sense, surrounded by guards and advisors and the weight of 2,000 worlds. Then Lily let go of David's hand and walked right up to her. "You're the dragon Dad told me about," Lily said matter-of-factly. The one who was cold. Every guard tensed. Advisors looked scandalized. You didn't just approach an empress. Especially not human children with no concept of proper protocol. Seraphine looked down at Lily. Something in her expression softened. She lowered herself until they were nearly eye level. "Yes," she said. "I was very cold. Your father shared his warmth." Lily considered this. Then she pulled off her jacket and held it up. "Do you need a blanket now?" The silence stretched. Then Seraphine did something no one expected. She laughed. Deep and genuine, a sound that echoed off the palace walls. "No, little one. I'm warm now. But thank you." She stood and her eyes found David's. In them, he saw everything they hadn't said. All the months apart, and words unspoken, and the impossible thing they had become. "Welcome home," she said. And somehow, despite being millions of miles from Earth on an alien world, it felt true.